Tonight, we're delving into a truly chilling piece of history. London, 1888. Specifically, the Whitechapel district.
Yeah, and it's crucial to understand what Whitechapel was like then. It wasn't the London of palaces and parliament.
No, not at all. This was the East End. Think extreme poverty, terrible overcrowding, made even worse by waves of immigration.
Conditions were appalling: high child mortality, crime, alcohol dependency. It was a really tough existence.
Survival was the main goal. And for many women, that meant facing impossible choices, like turning to casual prostitution, sometimes just for, what, 4 pence? Enough for a bed in a lodging house.
Exactly. It was a community living right on the edge, incredibly vulnerable, and into this setting steps a killer.
A killer whose brutal attacks on these women spread terror across London, and whose identity remains, well, a complete mystery.
Giving rise to that infamous name, Jack the Ripper.
And the reason we're talking about this, the reason you should stick to this, isn't just the morbid fascination, is it?
No, not at all. For you, exploring this is about understanding those harsh social conditions, the immense struggles of the police before modern forensics, remembering the victims as real people, not just names.
And maybe understanding why we're still trying to solve this puzzle over a century later.
It really highlights the challenges and keeps the focus where it belongs, on the women whose lives were cut short.
So let's really paint that picture of Whitechapel. It wasn't just poor. It was incredibly dense, right?
Packed. Narrow streets, these huge common lodging houses where dozens might sleep in a single room. Intense pressure on everything.
An environment where it was easy to be anonymous, but also incredibly exposed if you were vulnerable, especially for women.
Precisely. Those conditions made them targets. And the historical focus usually centers on 5 women, the canonical 5, whose murders are generally linked to the same killer.
The first was Nichols, known as Polly. Her story is just heartbreakingly typical of the struggle.
Yeah, separated from her family, struggles with alcohol, living in and out of workhouses and lodging houses.
On the night she died, August 30th, 1888, she apparently didn't have the money for her bed. Just 4 pence.
She was turned away, reportedly told someone, "I'll soon get my DOS money." Maybe showed off a new bonnet she had. Quite poignant, really.
Just hours later, early on August 31st, her body's found in Bucks Row.
The initial discovery, just horrific. Throat cut savagely, basically down to the spine. And it was only later at the mortuary that the abdominal mutilations were found.
Imagine being the first person on that scene, in the dark.
Utterly horrifying. Her funeral, by the way, was kept very quiet, almost secret. Because of the public frenzy and, well, morbid curiosity, very few people who actually knew her were there.
Then, not long after, Annie Chapman, sometimes called Dark Annie.
Another tragically similar story, separated from her husband, scraping by however she could. Odd jobs, needlework, casual prostitution, often stayed in a notorious lodging house on Dorset Street.
Her murder was September 8th. In the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street.
And here the violence escalates dramatically. The mutilations are far more severe, more specific.
Beyond the throat cut.
Oh, yes. Her abdomen was opened entirely, and organs were removed: the uterus, parts of the bladder and vagina. Some reports mention other organs placed near her shoulders. It suggests something more than just frenzied violence. Maybe calculation.
There was a witness sighting, was there? Someone saw her with a man?
Yes, described as looking shabby genteel. A vague description, but one that stuck.
Then we get to September 30th. The double event. 2 murders in one night. First, Elizabeth Stride.
Found around 1 a.m. in Dutfield's yard, off Burner Street.
But her injuries were different, weren't they?
Markedly so. A single deep cut to the throat. That was the cause of death. But none of the extensive abdominal mutilations seen with Chapman.
So the police thought.
They strongly suspected the killer was interrupted, maybe by a man named Louis Diemschutz, who drove his cart into that very yard right around the time she must have been killed. He nearly ran over the body.
Were there witnesses for Stride, too? Seeing her with someone?
There were. Several people reported seeing her with a man earlier that evening, but the descriptions were all over the place. Some said fair, some dark, shabby, well-dressed, completely contradictory, made things even harder for the police.
And then, incredibly, just 45 minutes later.
And less than a mile away, in Mitre Square, which is actually in the city of London, not Whitechapel proper.
Catherine Eddowes is found.
And the brutality is back. Full force. Her throat was cut ear to ear, terrible abdominal wounds, intestines pulled out, placed over her shoulder.
And organs removed again.
Yes. Critically, her left kidney and most of her uterus were taken, gone from the scene, plus vicious facial mutilations.
Happening in a public square. Even late at night, that's incredibly bold.
It is, and Eddowes had actually been in police custody earlier that evening, arrested for being drunk and incapable. They released her shortly before she was murdered.
Another witness sighting here, too.
Yes, someone saw her talking to a man near Mitre Square, again described as shabby-looking. Her funeral, unlike Polly Nichols's, drew huge crowds, a real public event.
The last of the canonical five, Mary Jane Kelly, November 9th, 1888.
Found in her own small room, 13 Miller's Court, a place off Dorset Street.
She'd been living with a man, Joseph Burnett.
Yes, but he'd lost his job, and she apparently relied more on prostitution, which led to arguments. He moved out just days before her death. She was behind on her rent.
And the scene inside that room?
Yeah.
It sounds like it was beyond anything they'd seen before.
Descriptions from police and doctors. They struggle for words. Unparalleled mutilation. Her body was on the bed, extensively eviscerated, dismembered, her face basically obliterated, throat cut to the bone.
Organs removed again.
Most of them, and placed around the room. Under her head, by her feet on the table, her heart was missing entirely, taken from the scene.
Neighbors heard something.
Some reported hearing faint cries like, "murder," during the night, but nobody investigated. The discovery was made the next morning by the landlord's assistant, peering through a broken window pane because she was behind on rent. Police also noted ashes in the fireplace. The thinking was the killer might have burned something, perhaps clothing, or even used a fire for light to carry out. Well, to carry out the extensive mutilations over a prolonged period.
Looking back at those 5 women, those 5 deaths, you see patterns emerging, don't you?
Definitely. The timing, late nights, weekends, often near the end of the month or week, and that terrifying progression in the violence, especially the focus on the abdomen, the organ removal.
If stride really was an interruption.
Then it suggests the killer went straight from that to Eddowes, almost completing the interrupted act, and then escalated even further with Kelly. It implies increasing confidence or perhaps increasing compulsion.
And the police had other attacks to consider too, right? It wasn't just these 5.
No, that complicated things hugely. There were other stabbings, like Annie Millwood, who survived initially but died later, and other murders, like Martha Tabram, killed just before Nichols, very brutally stabbed.
And those torso murders?
Right. Later discoveries like the Pynchon Street torso or the Whitehall mystery torso found in the Thames Embankment police building basement. Dismembered bodies, different methods. While police investigated links, and there's still debate today, generally they weren't definitively tied to the Ripper's known pattern, the canonical 5, because the methods were quite different.
Well, the police investigation. They were facing, well, almost insurmountable obstacles for the time.
Immense. Think about that population in Whitechapel. Constantly moving, people using aliases, hardly any official records. How do you even start identifying people?
That sounds like chaos.
It was incredibly difficult. They put in a massive effort, interviewing thousands, investigating hundreds, detaining around 80 people at various points, but pinning something down, very tough. The sheer transience was a nightmare for investigators.
And the nature of the wounds immediately sparked theories about the killer's skills, right? Surgeon or butcher.
That was a huge point of speculation and disagreement even then. Some doctors looked at the cuts and said, too messy for a surgeon. Others weren't so sure.
Did the police follow that up?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
They investigated local butchers, slaughterhouse workers, checked their movements, their alibis. But ultimately, they seemed to eliminate them from the inquiry. There was even talk, apparently, of checking cattle boat crews docking nearby. They were grasping at straws based on the physical evidence.
And the public wasn't just sitting back waiting. They were terrified, angry.
Absolutely. Frustration with the police led citizens to form groups like the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. George Lusk was a key figure there.
What did they actually do?
They were very active. They patrolled the streets themselves, trying to deter the killer. They put up their own reward, £50, which was a substantial sum then. They even hired private detectives. It just shows the level of fear and the feeling that the official investigation wasn't enough.
And the newspapers.
Intense media frenzy, sensationalism was rampant, and a lot of criticism aimed squarely at the police. You see it in contemporary cartoons, police shown as bumbling, ineffective.
There was this feeling the killer knew the area like the back of his hand.
Exactly. That he could navigate the dark alleys, the courtyards, and just vanish after the attacks. That added to the fear and the sense that the police were outmatched.
Then there's the Golston Street graffito, found near a piece of Eddowes' apron. That's always controversial.
Highly controversial. A piece of her bloodied apron was found in a doorway on Golston Street, and above it, Chalked on the wall was the message. The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing.
So, written by the killer.
That's the million-dollar question. Was it the killer dropping the apron piece and writing the message? Or was the graffiti already there, completely unrelated? Anti-Semitic graffiti wasn't uncommon in Whitechapel at the time. We just don't know.
But the police made a quick decision about it.
Very quick. The police commissioner, Sir Charles Warren, saw it and ordered it washed off immediately before daylight. His stated reason was the genuine fear of sparking anti-Semitic riots. Tensions were already high in the district. But of course, washing it away also destroyed potential evidence. So while maybe intended to keep the peace, it added another layer of complexity and criticism to the investigation. It shows how social issues directly impacted the police work.
The case also became famous, or infamous, for the letters, supposedly from the killer.
Yes, hundreds were sent to police and newspapers, but a few became particularly notorious. And this is where the name actually comes from.
Jack the Ripper.
Exactly. From the Dear Boss letter sent to the Central News Agency, it was signed Jack the Ripper, and the name just stuck. It captured the public imagination.
There were others too, the Saucy Jackie postcard.
Yes, and the From Hell letter. But the authenticity of most of these was doubted, even back then.
Doubted by who? The police.
By senior police officials, yeah. And many journalists. They suspected hoaxes. The Saucy Jackie postcard, for instance, seemed to refer to the double event, but it was postmarked so soon after the news broke that anyone could have written it based on early reports.
But the From Hell letter is often treated a bit differently, isn't it? It felt darker.
It did. It was sent to George Lusk, the head of the Vigilance Committee. The tone was different, more illiterate, more menacing, and it came with a small box.
Containing
half of a human kidney preserved in spirits. The writer claimed to have fried and ate the other half.
Could it have been Eddowes' kidney? The one that was missing?
That was the immediate question. Dr. Thomas Openshaw examined it. He confirmed it was human, left kidney, likely from a woman suffering from Bright's disease, which Eddowes apparently had. But he couldn't definitively say it was her kidney. It remains debated genuine artifact from the killer or just a gruesome hoax using a medical specimen. Openshaw himself later received a threatening letter signed Jack the Ripper.
It's incredible that even at the time, police suspected journalists might be writing these letters.
Yes, to keep the story going, boost newspaper sales. Scotland Yard even published copies of the Dear Boss handwriting, hoping someone would recognize it. But people like Commissioner Warren seemed convinced it was largely a media stunt. There were even reports they thought they knew which journalists might be responsible for some of them.
So the letters added to the terror, but maybe not the evidence.
Mostly terror and confusion, it seems.
Yeah.
They certainly cemented the name and the legend, but likely hindered the actual investigation.
Bringing things more up to date, how does modern criminal profiling view the case?
Well, obviously applying modern psychology to historical crimes is tricky, but profilers, like those from the FBI, have looked at the case details. They often categorize these as lust murders.
Meaning
Meaning the motivation wasn't simple violence, but rooted in a powerful, dark fantasy, usually involving themes of domination, control, degradation of the victim, acted out through extreme violence, particularly the mutilations focusing on sexual organs.
Does profiling suggest anything about the killer's characteristics?
Generally, yes. They might suggest someone with social difficulties, maybe physical issues, not necessarily someone who stood out in a crowd normally. Perhaps someone who changed appearance or clothing for the attacks. And crucially, someone with intimate knowledge of the Whitechapel area, the escape routes, the quiet spots.
You mentioned a name earlier linked to profiling, David Cohen.
Yes, some analysis points towards someone like a figure known contemporaneously as David Cohen, or perhaps John Picer, who was initially arrested, or someone similar. Cohen was apparently known for violent outbursts, matched some witness descriptions vaguely, and died in an asylum in late 1889, around the time the main wave of murders stopped.
So the profile suggests someone deeply disturbed.
Likely, yes. Someone possibly outwardly unassuming but harboring immense rage, lacking empathy, perhaps isolated, whose main interactions with women might have been transactional, like with prostitutes. Someone who could commit these horrific acts and then just melt back into the crowd.
Which brings us to the suspects. Over a century later, still no definitive answer.
None. It's arguably the most famous cold case ever. Over 100 names floated as suspects over the years. Theories range from plausible to, well, pretty wild. But zero consensus among experts.
You mentioned Aaron Kosminski, Was the suspect favored by some police officials at the time?
Yes. Figures like Chief Constable McNaughton and Inspector Sronson later named him, a Polish Jew living in Whitechapel, as their prime suspect. They believed he was identifiable but couldn't be prosecuted, perhaps due to lack of evidence or witnesses being unwilling to testify against a fellow immigrant.
And there was recent DNA news about him.
There were claims, yes, based on testing a shawl supposedly found near Catherine Eddowes. The results claimed mitochondrial DNA links to both Eddowes and descendants of Kosminski. However, and this is really important, these claims are highly controversial.
Why controversial?
The methodology, the chain of custody of the shawl, the interpretation of the DNA results, all have been heavily questioned by geneticists and ripperologists. The findings weren't published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal in the standard way, and crucially, it hasn't led to any official change in the case status. It's considered insufficient evidence by authorities. So Kosminski remains a significant historical suspect, but not proven.
What about William Henry Bury, the man executed in Scotland?
Bury's intriguing because he lived in the area, moved away shortly before the last canonical murder, Kelly, and then murdered his wife in Dundee in 1889. He strangled her, then mutilated her body post-mortem.
Similarities to the Ripper?
Some in the mutilation, yes, but also differences. The strangulation wasn't the Ripper's primary method. Police investigated him at the time, but didn't find a strong link. His own executioner pushed the Ripper theory, but Bury denied it, even while confessing to killing his wife. It's mostly circumstantial.
Carl Feigenbaum, the one whose lawyer made claims.
Right. A German sailor executed in New York in 1896 for murdering his landlady. After the execution, his lawyer claimed Feigenbaum suffered from a disease that drove him to kill and mutilate women, and that Feigenbaum himself believed he was the Ripper.
Sounds dramatic. Plausible.
Well, researchers have tried to place him in Whitechapel during the murders, linking him to other crimes too, but there's no concrete proof he was even in London then. And the lawyer's claims, made after his client couldn't refute them, are obviously questionable. Another suspect with smoke, but no definitive fire.
And David Cohen, as we discussed, linked more through the profile.
Exactly. He fits certain behavioral patterns suggested by profiling the escalating violence, the institutionalization around the time the murder stopped, but it's a theoretical match based on behavior, not hard evidence linking him directly to the crimes.
We should probably mention the Wilder theories too, briefly. The royal conspiracy.
Oh yes. Theories involving Queen Victoria's grandson, Prince Albert Victor, or her physician, Sir William Gall. These are almost universally dismissed by serious historians. They rely on elaborate, unsubstantiated narratives, often ignoring basic facts like Gall being elderly and having suffered a stroke. Pure speculation, really.
And the artist Walter Sickert.
Sickert knew the area and was fascinated by the murders, sometimes incorporating dark themes into his art. Some authors have built cases around interpreting his paintings or supposed coded messages, but again, it's highly debated, very controversial, and lacks concrete evidence. Most experts view it as conjecture.
So it seems the more grounded ideas keep circling back to a few core possibilities.
Pretty much. That the killer was likely local, knew Whitechapel intimately, maybe someone with anatomical knowledge like a butcher, though police couldn't prove that, or even the unsettling idea that maybe it wasn't just one person.
Multiple killers.
It's a theory some have proposed to explain variations in method or the double event. But again, no proof. The simple, frustrating truth is the lack of resolution has left a huge void, filled by over a century of speculation. The police at the time leaned towards a local killer, but the very nature of Whitechapel made finding him almost impossible.
So we've walked through the grim realities of Whitechapel in 1888, remembered the tragic lives of Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. We've looked at the investigation's hurdles, the mysterious letters, the profiling attempts, and just a handful of the countless suspect theories.
It remains a truly haunting case, a stark look at poverty, vulnerability, and the limits of detection back then. And the fact that we still don't know who did it is absolutely central to why it continues to grip us.
The name Jack the Ripper is known worldwide, but the identity behind that name is still lost to time, a phantom. And because we can't put a face to the killer, the focus inevitably returns again and again to the victims and the enduring, chilling question: will we ever truly know who walked those dark streets?